what has your research found about either the role of women and or the suffering of women, and you can include children there if you would like, when you talk about conflicts like Kashmir or any other conflict where the average person gets caught between competing sides?
No, thank you for asking me that. I want to go back. I mean, this goes way back when I was a young counterterrorism analyst in the US government, and I was the first American Muslim woman in the Counterterrorism Center. So at that point in my life, no one was focused on female terrorists. It was too new because most of the people who were joining, whether it was Al Qaeda or many of these other groups in Somalia, they were male dominated groups, and they still are, and I argue they still will be. And yet women were slowly beginning to join. And when in those days, when I was looking at this work and I was actually writing intelligence assessments for US presidents, in fact, one of my assessments became declassified and it was called From Rocking the Cradle to Rocking the World, Why Muslim Women Kill. It was a very sassy title because, I had to capture the attention of, the State Department and so forth. But it was a very dark subject. And I myself, being a spiritual American Muslim woman, I wanted to understand this phenomenon. And I began to see that in those days, the greatest support women offered was spiritual. And so it was, they were logistics, or facilitators, communication nodes. They were still in the background. And yet over time, by the time you were looking at even some cases in Chechnya, or by the time I left the agency and I was a policy analyst, the RAND Corporation, I began to see women strapping on the bomb in Iraq. And I published the first op-ed in November 2005, and I predicted that you would have more than 50 suicide bombers in Iraq. And that's when media began to ask me what made me feel this way. And I looked at, and I tried to answer this question. And I was giving talks in government circles and wherever, and began to realize that this was such a complex topic that I had to break it down. And so finally, when I wrote my book, Invisible Martyrs, which came out in 2018, I created a 3Cs framework. And this has helped me, but it also helps military officers that I train today, which is context, culture, and capability. That if you truly want to understand the roots of radicalization, because I do believe we need to come back to the psychology of violence, you need to understand one's cultural background. Like, is there a culture in which that a man and woman belong to that actually subscribes to violence? And do certain cultures lend themselves to violence, for example? And then there's what you hear counterterrorism experts talk about all the time, which is a push and pull factors. And that is my second C, which is context. Context comes from, it could be your environment, but it's even more broader than that. And then capability, because the reality is, as you know, Phil, many people who live in conflict, most of them don't turn to violence. It's actually a minority. And of that minority, I come back to capability. Some people may be willing, but they're not actually capable. And then there are those that are capable. And so you have to go deeper and ask the question, why? And then I come back to looking at individual cases. And what I have found is you cannot make blanket statements. There is no aha moment. There is no real, there might be trigger events, but many people who do join radical groups, even in the conflict in Kashmir, who become suicide bombers or militants, it is over time. You have been exposed to either violence has been committed against you. You've been what I call, there's two strands, the victims and the victimizers. I feel that many who have joined radical groups have been victimized to some extent, or they feel the sense of victimization. And for coming back to women, altruism plays a pivotal role far beyond men. I really believe that women I have interviewed truly believe that there is a greater cause that's greater than themselves, and they see this as protecting not only the children, the future generations of children, but also bringing attention to a cause and giving their life meaning here and in the afterlife.